Like we said, welcome everybody to Knitting 104, Fixing Mistakes on this Monday afternoon. Hopefully you are all ready to learn how to fix those drop stitches and accidental purls and all of that stuff. My name is Claire. I'll be hanging out with you in the chat here. If you've got any questions during the course of the class, go ahead and put them in the chat there, and then I'll direct them to Darren or answer them directly myself. We are recording this, so you can watch it back as many times as you need to. It'll be on the Michael's YouTube channel. And I'll put the handout in the chat in case you need that as well if you didn't receive it. And then a reminder, if you are possibly interested in learning about how to do Fair Isle flat, we do have a special premium class coming up on March 28th for the Checkmate sweater. So you can check that to sign up on michaels.com soon. And now that all of that is done, we'll switch this over to Darren.
Right, welcome to class, and today we are going to learn how to fix mistakes that that many people make in their knitting. So especially as beginners and as people that are learning how to knit, it's very, very common to make a lot of mistakes. The good news about knitting is if you've made a mistake in your knitting, and even if you don't realize you've made it until maybe like a couple days later, you've knitted maybe 3 or 4 or 5 inches, you can still go back and fix these mistakes. You don't have to live with them. And you can fix them without ripping everything out. So it's kind of a magical thing. So it's really exciting to learn how to fix these mistakes. Once we learn how to fix these mistakes, it'll also help you to understand how the knit stitches and purl stitches fit together to kind of create your fabric. And once you start to understand how they all fit together, then it really helps you to understand more about your knitting and how to control your knitting. And then you're going to be in charge of your knitting instead of your knitting being in charge of you. So sometimes, I know when I first started knitting, I really felt like the knitting was in charge and I had no idea what was happening. So it's nice to get that knowledge and be able to feel like you're empowered to correct these mistakes. You'll learn about the mistakes, so maybe you can avoid them to begin with. So it's really a very empowering class. So with all that being said, let's go ahead and switch to the view of my hands, and we will get the lighting right this week, and we will go ahead and get started. There's a lot to be covered in this class, and if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask them and let Claire know what questions you have. And I'll try to cover things as many times as we need to. Especially on video, sometimes it's hard to see exactly what's going on. So first things first, I am going to be using this hometown bonus bundle for demonstrations in my class today. And this is a great yarn, especially for demonstrating because it's a nice thick yarn so students can see what I'm doing fairly easily. Comes in a wide variety of really great colors. It's 100% acrylic, a number 6 bulky weight yarn, so you can use a size 13 needle with it. Projects work up really fast. So it's a great yarn to make projects with. I love teaching with it. It's really a good yarn. It's available on lionbrand.com. or on michaels.com. So you can get that and look it up and see if your favorite color is available. Probably is, because there's a lot of really good colors, really wide assortment of colors. So I've knitted up 2 little practice swatches. I think this one's showing up better today on camera. And as you can see, there are a couple of mistakes in this swatch. There's some things that are not great. So right here, for some reason, I just made a purl stitch by mistake. I wasn't paying attention to what I was doing, and somehow I made a purl stitch. So that looks weird. Here, let me see if we can get a close up on this. So right here, this is a twisted stitch, and we're going to talk a little bit more about twisted stitches later. And you can see the stitch below it is not twisted. Each leg of that, each side of the stitch, each side of that V is going straight down on the not twisted one, and they're not touching each other, they're not crossed. But if you look at this twisted stitch right here, get that cable out of the way. Look at this twisted stitch right here. You can see this leg is going underneath, and this one is going across the top. And you can't separate them because they're twisted. And like the one below it, they're just kind of going right next to each other. So that's not the worst thing that'll ever happen in your knitting, but if you get a bunch of those together, it does add a different texture to your fabric. You might not like it. So we're going to talk about how to fix that, how to fix this accidental purl down here. And then over here, I was knitting and I split my yarn. So, wasn't paying attention at all to what was happening. I split my yarn. So, we're going to want to fix that. We don't want to leave that in our work. So these are just a couple of mistakes that you'll make that are very common to make. So to fix this one over here, it's on the same row that I'm knitting. So the best way to fix that is to just unknit. I'm just going to unknit my knitting one stitch at a time until I get back to where I need to fix it. So a little bit about unknitting. So let's talk about regular knitting first. When I'm knitting, my stitches start off on my left hand and I knit one at a time from the left to the right. So that's the direction that I'm going right here. So knitting from the left to the right. And so when we're unknitting, we want to hold our work the same way we held our work when we created the stitches. So sometimes there's the temptation when you're unknitting to turn it and to kind of go back this direction, but that's not what we want to do. You want to make sure you're holding your work in the same position that you were holding it when you made your stitches, okay? And so for unknitting, you're going to take your working yarn and kind of pull it out. I have a twisted stitch here, so I'm just going to get rid of that one real quick. I have a lot of mistakes on this one. I was doing a lot of things to show you how to correct them. So you want to take your working yarn and kind of pull it. And then the stitch that you're going to unknit, you can kind of hold right under that as well. And it kind of opens up that little window. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take our left-hand needle and we're going to go through that stitch, always front to back, unravel it, and now we've did our unknit. So a couple more. So pull your working yarn and pull the stitch, and what it's going to do is open that little space, that window, and then you're going to go through it front to back and just unknit one stitch at a time. Now this is a technique that you can use if you don't have a lot of stitches to unknit. So I'm just going back to fix this mistake I made over here. So if you were like doing a baby blanket and you had like 100 stitches or 300 stitches, you wouldn't want to have to do this like for a couple of rows because it would be very tedious. And there are other ways to accomplish it. So we'll cover those later. But for just going back a couple of stitches or a couple of rows, unknitting is a good idea. So pull your working yarn and pull right below that stitch to open that space. And then take your left-hand needle, always front to back. And if you do it correctly, you're not going to have any twisted stitches and your stitch mounts will stay correct. All right, so here is a problem right here. So let's unknit that. So I'm going to unknit it. You can see I split my yarn there. So I'm going to take that off of my needle and I'm going to unravel a stitch. I'll take it down a couple just because. And then when you're fixing mistakes, it's nice to have a crochet hook handy because these crochet hooks do come in handy for knitting as well as crochet. So I've unraveled my stitch down so I can correct my split stitch. This is my active loop. So this is my loop right here that's still active. We don't want to let this continue to run. So I'm going to pop my crochet hook on that. And then if you look here, you're going to see these bars that run in between the stitches. They're kind of like the rungs of a ladder. So we're going to pick each one of those up one at a time with our crochet hook. So you just go under them with the crochet hook, and then you pull them back through your active loop. And you want to make sure you don't skip any, and you're going to pull them one at a time. And this is correcting my dropped knit stitches. And then I'm gonna put that back on my needle, and then we're gonna look at it. And I've corrected my split stitch, and then I've picked up the other couple of stitches that I dropped, okay? So that is unknitting. And again, you could unknit this whole swatch if you wanted to, but usually I only unknit if I'm going back, maybe if I were making a scarf, I might unknit a couple of rows, but if I were making a baby blanket or something, I would not want to unknit. So how often do you unknit, Claire? Do you unknit very often?
I think I have sort of roughly the same guidelines as you. If it's a narrow project, probably do it a few rows, but if I'm doing like a big shawl or something, you don't want to unknit 300 stitches. That's just too much.
Yeah, it's quite tedious. So right here, something doesn't look right there. So that's a twisted stitch. So a twisted stitch actually is twisted. It looks like its legs are crossed. And you don't want to stand around with your legs crossed like that. That's not a good look, right? So we're gonna have to try to fix that. If you look at this whole row of stitches, you can see I can pull them apart and separate them. But when I get to this twisted stitch, I can't. So, I mean, clearly there's something wrong there. So I'm just going to let this stitch drop off of my needle. I'm going to unravel it. And same process, I'm just going to pop that right on my crochet hook, find my active loop. Now here, you don't want to skip any of these. You want to make sure you're picking up the very first one first. And you're just going to pick up that bar, pull it back through the active loop, and then now that's my active loop. And so I'm going to pick up this last one. Okay, and then there's my loop. And when you put that on your needle, you want to put it on so that the leg, I've split my yarn. I want you to be able to see what I'm doing. So when you have your loop, just going straight up like this, I've got my left leaning leg and my right leaning leg. You want to make sure that the right leaning leg is turned to the front when you put it on that needle, and then that way it will not be twisted when you work it. So that's how you replace the stitch back on your needle without twisting it. So I'm going to go ahead and knit that one. I have a lot of twisted stitches on here. I did them on purpose because I wanted to be able to demonstrate. So this is another one right here that's twisted. And so I'm going to fix this one. I'm not going to drop it down. And I untwisted it. And now I can fix that without my crochet hook because I've practiced. So here is another twisted one. I'm going to enter that stitch from the back, unravel it, kind of straighten it out in my finger. And then I can pick this up just with my knitting needle. And now I'm going to knit it. So that is a dropped stitch, and fixing a dropped stitch, and fixing how to pick up a knit stitch. Any questions about that? About what a twisted stitch is, how to unknit, or about picking up a drop stitch?
What are some reasons you might end up with a twisted stitch?
So if a stitch falls off of your needle like this, you might put it on and twist it by mistake. So that's one way. If you knit, and instead of wrapping your yarn counterclockwise, if you wrap your yarn the wrong direction, that will give you a twisted stitch. Instead of entering the stitch the correct way here, if you enter the stitch this way, that will give you a twisted stitch. I think that's the most common ways you get a twisted stitch, isn't it, Claire?
Yeah, I feel like it's most often you're either working through the back loop or you're wrapping your yarn the wrong direction, either on the knit or the purl. I think sometimes people wrap it yarn when they're wrong when they're purling.
Yeah. You always want to make sure you're wrapping your yarn counterclockwise, and that will help avoid a twisted stitch. And again, it's not the end of the world, a twisted stitch, but it does make your fabric more tight, and it can change the texture if you get a bunch of them together. So here I have a purl stitch where I should have had a knit stitch. And so instead of ripping I don't have to unknit clear back to here or rip it out. All you have to do is just knit over to this column of stitches, drop it off your needle, and I'm going to unravel and go down until I've unraveled the mistake. And when I have this many stitches to pick up, I do want to use my crochet hook. So you find that active loop and you make sure you're holding the loop straight so the legs are not crossed. You pop that right on your crochet hook. And then you're going to find the very lowest one. You don't want to, sometimes that lowest one can be pushed down, so you don't want to skip it by mistake. You want to double check. And then you're just going to go under that bar, pull it back through the loop. So it's like climbing up a ladder, just one at a time. It's just like magic. You'll feel like you're doing magic when you do it, but it's so, once you do it a couple times, it's very easy after you've had a chance to practice. And sometimes it will look a little odd, like with this yarn, it kind of bounces back to shape very nice. But some certain yarns, when you do this, it might not look really great at first, but the tension will even out. And by the time you're finished your project, it will look very nice. And after you've blocked your project or washed it, then it'll look absolutely perfect at that point. So you don't have to worry about distorting your fabric either. So just, you want to be gentle with it. You don't want to be crazy, but you don't have to worry about it too much. Okay, any questions?
We did have someone ask about picking up stitches if you had a drop stitch on the purl side. How would you do that?
All right, let's look at that. Very important to be able to pick up a dropped purl as well. So let's unravel it. Okay. So again, you want to make sure you're finding your active loop. And if you were out somewhere like on a bus or sitting in a park and you took out your knitting and you dropped a stitch, then you want to make sure you're securing this stitch very quick. So if you have a safety pin or a stitch marker, you can pop that on there. And that way it'll keep it from running. You really don't want it to run down past your cast on. So you want to catch it as soon as you can and make it secure. And then once you get to a place where you can sit down and look at it and fix it is better. So you want to go ahead and we'll take that back off. We're going to put that right on. But the thing about a purl stitch, when you knit a purl stitch, when you create one, you actually enter the stitch from above. When you knit, you enter it this way. And when you purl, you kind of enter it from above. So when we fix a purl stitch, we also have to enter the stitch a different way than we do our knit. So we enter it from above like this. So that's the first difference. And then what we're going to do is we're going to find the lowest bar. And we're going to take that lowest bar and it leapfrogs over our active loop. So here's our active loop. And we're going to pull that bar through the active loop this way. And I've picked up a purl. And I'm going to pick up a couple more and I'm going to show you some things to help you remember how to make it easier. Okay. So we find the lowest bar, it leapfrogs over the active loop and it lands on the crochet hook. You're going to hold that active loop so that you can pull that bar back through that active loop. And now we've picked up another one. So here's a mistake. When I used to teach this class in person, sometimes students they'd hold their crochet hook like this, and then they take their bar and they jump over. And then it's like, now what do I do? Like, I don't know what's happening. So what you want to make sure is that you're giving yourself, you need to have a workspace. So this is your workspace right here. So give yourself plenty of workspace. And when this bar jumps over the active loop, it's going to land on your crochet hook. It's going to land right here. And then when you pull it through, the hook has a chance to grab a hold of it. So if you don't give yourself enough workspace when you jump over it, then nothing happens. So make sure you give yourself plenty of neck. This is the neck of the crochet hook. Give yourself plenty of neck or plenty of workspace. Jump over, it lands on the crochet hook, hold your loop, and then pull that bar back through. And that's how you pick up a purl stitch. But in reality, if I were making stockinette stitch and I dropped a stitch on the purl side, I would probably turn it over and pick it up on the knit side because knit stitches are easier to pick up. But it is nice to know how to pick up a purl because if you're, and we're going to look at garter stitch in a few minutes, but if you're working on a pattern or a design where you have like knits and purls alternating within the columns, you know, in different orders, you need to know how to pick up a purl stitch in that situation. So any questions at all? Do you want to see it again? Does it make sense?
I think that's a good demonstration.
Okay. Anything else that we're doing?
Did have someone ask about how to pick up stitches in garter stitch. So good to know we'll be getting to that soon.
Yes, we will be getting to that. Okay. Unravel, I'm going to unknit just a few more. I want to show you how to unknit on the purl side. So I've got to get to my purl side. While I'm doing that, any questions? How do we feel about unknitting?
We do have someone asking how you recover a drop stitch, which is what we just covered. So you can go back and watch that when the recording is posted.
A lot of people actually don't realize what a drop stitch actually is. I've had a lot of people come and show me their work and say they've dropped a stitch when in fact they didn't. So, you know, sometimes a drop stitch might not be what you think it is, but a drop stitch is actually when it drops off the needle and then usually starts unraveling. So yeah, that's what we just covered. Okay, so for a purl stitch, again, you want to make sure, like if I were going to be purling, my stitch starts off on my left and I purl it over to the right. So if I have to undo this row for some reason, you want to make sure you're holding your work the same way you held your work when you created the stitches. And I'm going from the right to the left. So open up that stitch, go front to back, and then transfer it over. You pull your working yarn and you can hold right under the stitch to open that window, enter the stitch front to back, let it fall off the other needle. And you don't want to rush this, you want to take your time, but that is unknitting on the purl side or unpurling. It does take a little practice. And if you do it correct, then you're not going to change the stitch mount at all. Okay, any questions?
I think we might have some confusion between a dropped stitch and a twisted stitch.
All right, let's look at it. So here is a drop stitch. You see how that dropped off my needle? So that's why it's called a drop stitch, because you let it drop. You dropped it off your needle, and then usually if you're not paying attention, it will unravel a little bit. So that's a drop stitch. And just, I mean, it's exactly what it sounds like. It dropped off your needle, and now it's kind of out of control because it's dropped off the needle. And then to pick that up, it's nice to have a crochet hook. And then you just pick them up as you go, one at a time, climbing up the ladder. And so that is a drop stitch. And then a twisted stitch. I had several on here. Let me see if I can find one. Right here is a twisted stitch. So a twisted stitch is still securely on the needle. So this right here, let's see if we can get a good view of it. This right here is a twisted stitch, and you can see how this leg of that stitch is kind of crossing over, and you can't really see the other leg as much. So this leg right here, see how it looks really short? Because this leg is crossing over it, so it's actually twisted. And so I'm going to drop, now I'm dropping a stitch to correct that so that it's untwisted. And so the reason it's called a twisted stitch is because it is actually twisted. So there it's twisted, and I'm going to untwist it right here. And now you can see the legs are not crossed. So that's a proper stitch. And if you twist it, now it's a twisted stitch, and it actually is really just twisted. So you want to make sure the legs are going straight up and down and not twisted. And now I'm going to pick up the stitch here that I dropped to correct it and put it back on. Yeah, so a twisted stitch, and these aren't we're not trying to trick you. A twisted stitch is actually twisted, and a dropped stitch actually drops off of your needle. So I know sometimes, terms don't always sound exactly like what they are, but in this situation, it's exactly what it sounds like. So maybe the confusion was I was dropping the stitches off my needle to correct the twisting. So that could be where the confusion came in. Does that make sense? Does that help?
Yes, I think that clarifies it.
Okay. Yeah, it is confusing especially if you've never heard these terms before. It can be very confusing. Any other questions before we move on?
I think we might be moving to this next, but someone wanted to know how to pick up a drop stitch that's the very first or the very last stitch on the needle. So your edge
All right.
stitch.
That is exactly where we're going next. So let me get there. All right, I'm just going to slip my stitches over so I can get to the edge, because that's the fastest way for me to get there. So this is a kind of a scary thing to see. And if you don't know how to fix it, then it's actually, quite a upsetting thing to see. And if you're in a knitting group and somebody has this happen and you know how to fix it, then you'll be the hero of the day, okay? So maybe your stitch falls off your needle and you didn't realize it. And, maybe it goes down, a couple of rows even. Usually yarn doesn't want to see it. Like I'm trying to force it to unravel, especially if your yarn's fuzzy. It's not really going to unravel so easily, but it can happen. So if this were to happen to your project, it would be very, very disheartening, and you would be quite unhappy to see that. And you might think, oh, I know how to pick up a drop stitch, so I'm just going to pick up each one of these, picking up my drop stitches, put it back on, and now I'm ready to go. Okay, well, it doesn't look quite right, does it? I mean, it's better than it was, and it's secured it. It's not going to continue to unravel, but that doesn't look right. So let's look at it again, see what we can do. So if you look at these loops of yarn, what you're going to realize is that if you follow the row across, then you go across, and this loop is coming out of this row, and it's circling back, and then it's going into the row above it. So it's actually involved in two different rows. Same thing with this one. Each one of these loops are going and coming out of one row and into another row. So it's actually two rows we need to pick up. So what we need to do, see if I can do this without blocking it with my hand, is I need to pick up both sides of this loop. So I'm going to pick up the bottom part of the loop and then the top part of that loop, okay? So I'm going to pick up the bottom part of that loop. And then the top part of that loop. The bottom part, and then the top part. And then here, see, I had it twisted like that in my hand. Make sure you're not twisting it. So the bottom part, and then the top part. And then I'm going to pop that back on my needle without twisting it. Look, double check it when I do. And now that looks pretty good, right? I think that looks very nice. So that is how to pick up a drop stitch on the edge, and especially, if it's unraveled like that. We want to see that again, or did that make sense?
I think let's see that one more time. You might have blown a few people's minds.
Let's unravel it. Try a slightly different angle this time. So the first thing I would recommend doing in a situation like this would be to kind of lay these loops out so that you're seeing exactly what you're dealing with. You don't want them to be kind of all jumbled together. So lay them out like this. Crochet hook is going to be your good friend. And so sometimes if you kind of put your finger in that loop like that, it'll kind of help keep track of the top loop and the bottom loop. So bottom loop, shoot, now I've lost track of what I'm doing. So the bottom loop, and then the top of the loop. To the bottom of the loop, and then the top of the loop. So I'm trying to do it so you can see what I'm doing, and it makes it kind of hard for me to do it that way. So the bottom of the loop, and then the top of the loop. And then this one, the bottom of the loop, and then the top of the loop, and then put it back on. And it looks pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. Okay. How does that make you feel? You feel good about it? You want to see it again? Maybe I'll try to demonstrate it on this side. I think it might be easier for me to demonstrate this side.
Just to give you a time check, we are about halfway through class, Darren.
Okay, I think we're making pretty good time though. Okay. Okay, so I've got my loops. So the bottom of that loop, and then the top, and then the bottom, and then the top, and then the bottom, the top, and then we'll pop that right back on there. All right, how's that? Do you guys able to see that all right? Do you feel like you understand? We want to see it again. Are you ready to move to garter stitch?
Let's move to garter stitch because I think we had a couple of people who still wanted to see how to pick up from the purl side.
Okay. All right, so garter stitch. The thing you have to remember about garter stitch versus stockinette stitch. So with stockinette stitch, we put all of our knits on one side and all of the purls are placed on the other side. So it's easy to keep track of where we are and what we're looking at. Very easy. Now garter stitch, because we create garter stitch usually we make garter stitch by knitting every stitch on every row. And of course you could purl every stitch on every row, but usually we do it by knitting every stitch. And when you knit one row and then turn your work and knit the next row, you're putting knit stitches on every row, but you're also putting purl stitches on the back of each row. So it turns out to be this alternating fabric where what we have are purl stitches and then knit stitches. So the purl stitches are raised up to these like mountains or these raised ridges. And then the knit stitches are in the valleys down between, or in these lower kind of these trenches. So it creates this nice kind of insulated spongy fabric, which is very nice. But if you have to pick up a drop stitch, then it does make it a little bit more challenging. So I'm getting over here to where I can drop a stitch. So maybe like you just drop a stitch by accident and it unravels, or maybe you realize down here you split your yarn or something happened, something weird happened, and you have to kind of go down. And every time I do this, it makes me very anxious, even though I'm just demonstrating. So I don't think this is anybody's idea of a fun afternoon. How do you feel about it, Claire? Do you love doing this?
Not really, no.
Even for demonstrating, my heart starts to pound a little bit because I'm a little anxious about it. All right, so what we have to do though is we have to stop everything and think about what we're looking at. So we need to look at this very carefully. Now I talked about the fabric and how these ridges that are raised are purls, and then the valleys below are knits. So we know that. So if we look, what we're going to see is that some of these strands of yarn, they're coming out of the raised ridges or the mountains, and they're going across and connecting to mountains. And then the ones coming out of the valleys are coming out and they're moving across and they're connected to the other side, which is a valley. So what that's telling us is that these bars that end up being on the top are actually going to be purls because they're coming out of purls and they're going into purls. And then the ones at the bottom are coming out of knit stitches and they're going into knit stitches. So just if you ever find yourself in this situation, just take a second and like look at it before you start picking up stitches and start evaluating, you know, what is it that I'm actually looking at? Because you want to understand what's happening. Okay. So what happens is you end up creating, or it ends up creating kind of this tunnel where I've got my purl stitches on the top, my knit stitches on the bottom, and there is my active loop. Okay, so now I can see where are my purl stitches and where are my knit stitches. Okay, so my first loop, the ones that are my first rung of my ladder, the one that's on the very bottom, is a purl stitch. So I'm going to pick that up as a purl stitch. So I'm going to enter it from above. I'm going to give myself plenty of workspace. It's going to jump over, landing on my crochet hook. I'm going to hold onto my active loop and then pull it through. And now I have to reposition my crochet hook to pick up my next one, which is down here as a knit stitch. And I always feel like they're so much easier. It happened, I didn't even realize it, right? It happened so fast. Now I'm going to hold on to that loop. I have to reposition. I have to reapproach from above. And I'm going to make sure you give yourself plenty of workspace, leapfrog over, hold on to that loop, pull it back through, okay? Have to reposition to pick up my knit stitch, or you can get this handy dandy little tool, which has a crochet hook on each end. This is it's a double-ended crochet hook, which is used for Tunisian crochet in the round. So this comes in very handy for knitting as well. I'm going to pick up my knit stitch, and then instead of repositioning my hook, all I have to do is do that. Now, give myself plenty of workspace, leapfrog over, pull it through. So much easier if you have this little tool. Okay, any questions? The main thing you have to realize though is you just have to alternate between knits and purls to pick up in garter stitch. And then with this crochet hook's a little small, so it is easy to split the yarn if you're not careful. And put it
That
back
ties in
on.
nicely to the question in our chat. Ashley wanted to know, does the size of the crochet hook matter?
So I mean, it does and it doesn't when you're fixing mistakes. If you look at whatever yarn you're using, this is recommending a size 13 or 9mm knitting needle, or it's also recommending an N13 or a 9mm crochet hook. So ideally, you would want a crochet hook that's pretty close to this. So like an 8mm. I was actually using a 9mm here, but even a 7mm might not be so bad. This is a 6mm and it's getting a little small, and I felt like I was going to split my yarn. So you do want to have a crochet hook that's fairly close to the size recommended by the yarn, or close to the size of your knitting needle. You don't want to use a bigger one. So like this is a 9mm. I'm knitting with 9mm. I wouldn't want to use like a 12mm crochet hook, because that's going to stretch out my stitches. So, close to the size, maybe just a little smaller would be ideal. Any other questions about anything like that? How are we doing? Do we want to see garter stitch again? What questions? Do we have any questions?
Someone says, now I know why I keep all of my wrappers. And yes, you want to keep your
Oh,
yarn
keep all
knitting.
of
It's
it?
got a lot of good info.
What is it?
Now they know why they keep their yarn wrappers.
Oh, yes, those yarn wrappers can be quite handy, actually. So, all right, what questions do we have?
I think I had saved some here. Let me go back.
We have about 15 minutes. I think the only other thing I have to show is we're going to talk about a lifeline, unless if there are any other questions.
We didn't have any questions that were directly related to fixing mistakes. So let's go ahead with the lifeline first.
Okay. So I feel like, usually we do have more questions. So if you guys have questions, don't hesitate to ask. That's why we're here.
Alice wants to know, can a purl stitch get twisted?
Yes, purl stitches or knit stitches, absolutely. They can all be twisted. So you do want to make sure you're being careful. They're easy to untwist. So a little bit about a lifeline and how it works and what it's for. So I worked this little swatch up, and I did some Fair Isle work, and I made these cute little gnomes. And technically they're really not that hard, but let's pretend that it was super hard, and I don't want to mess these up for any reason. So I finished my gnomes, and then above these gnomes, let's just say for the project I'm making, I'm going to do a lace panel, or I'm going to do another maybe snowflakes or prancing reindeer, or I'm going to do cables, something else that maybe I'm not comfortable doing, or maybe I realize I'm pretty sure I could make a mistake. So there could be mistakes made. And the problem with making mistakes in knitting is, like we showed, like sometimes you can unknit and fix them. And sometimes you can drop a stitch down and fix it if you just have one or two mistakes here or there. But let's just say like I knit 30 rows of this lace pattern and then realize none of it was right, and I want to take it out and start again. You don't want to have to unknit like 20 or 30 rows, because that's very tedious. What you're going to want to do is take your needles off of your work and unravel it by hand. And that can be very scary, because what can happen, sometimes the stitches do get away from you and they could unravel like down into this Fair Isle work. And you don't want to have to, you can, I could unravel this all the way down, even through my Fair Isle, and then pick stitches up, picking up the correct colors as I go. But you don't want to do that if you don't have to. Like you don't want like 4 or 5 rows unraveling and causing a big mess. So if you plan ahead, if you know something like this could be in your future and you're planning ahead, what you can do is you can put a lifeline in advance. And that's what I did here. You can see this string running through my stitches, and it's actually dental floss. And I've been told by different people that they like to use dental floss because it's not fuzzy. You're not going to leave like fuzz behind, and it's easy to work with. And, you always kind of have it on hand. It's minty fresh, all good things. And then all you're going to do is you just, pull out some, long enough to go all the way across, put it on your darning needle, and then you're just going to run that through the stitches on your needle, and then just leave it in there. And then if you have to take your stitches off of your needle and unravel it, it's not going to unravel past where this lifeline is. That's why it's called a lifeline. It's like a safety net. So you're not going to be able to unravel it past that. Your work is safe. If you don't do that in advance, and then you realize, oh, I've made horrible mistakes, I just want to rip everything out, but I don't want to risk, this work, because this work here is fine, and I don't want to have to start over, then what you can do is put a lifeline in after the fact. So I'm going to show you how to do that now. So I put this red stripe in just so that you guys could see what the stitches look like in one row. You probably wouldn't have just one row of a certain color to use as a guide, but I wanted you to see that. So if we look at one knit stitch, so one knit stitch is right here, and it's shaped like a V. So the knit stitches are shaped like a V. You don't want to look at your knit stitches like this, and that's an upside down V, or it's an A. So that is half of one stitch and half of another stitch. So you want to make sure you're looking at the stitches correctly. Okay, so we're looking at that V. And that's why I did this row in red, so that we could isolate them and look and see what we're seeing. So that is our V, that is our actual knit stitch, not the upside down V, which is the A. And sometimes it's really hard to see at the beginning where your stitches start. So again, with this red, we can see here that is my stitch. And so the first leg of my stitch is right here. Easy to find. But if you don't have a red one and you're just kind of looking here, sometimes it's hard to find that beginning stitch. So if you kind of isolate the ones that are beside it, so that is a V, that is an A. So sometimes you can kind of sort it out and find, right there. So it does take a little practice, but I wanted you to see here that this is the first stitch, which is shaped like a V, and this is the second one, shaped like a V, and then this is the third one. So what we want to do is you want to get a knitting needle that's smaller than what you were knitting with. So this one is very small. You could use, like, this one is quite a bit smaller. So something like this would be fine. And what we're going to do is we're going to find our knit stitches, which are shaped like V's. And what we're going to do is we're going to pick up the first leg of each stitch. So there. We're going to skip the second leg and pick up the first leg. And we're going to end up looking, they should all be spaced out about the same distance, and they should all be leaning the same way, like that. That's how we know we're doing it correct. So we are going to start off at the very beginning. So here, here. You just want to take your time, work your way across. Maybe every so often stop and look and see that it's going to look evenly spaced. If you do it wrong, sometimes I would like to demonstrate doing things wrong so that we can see how that looks. Okay, so now we're going to stop and look at it. So these are all spaced out nice, going the same direction. Now they're leaning the wrong direction and there's a big space. So that's wrong, right? We can look at that and see that probably does. It's probably not right. So let's go back and reevaluate. So we're picking up the first leg, skipping one, picking up one, skipping one. And you want to try to go in a straight line. It's easy. Now this is big yarn, so it's kind of easy to see what we're doing. But if it were sock yarn, sometimes it's easy to get off track. Okay. Any questions about putting this lifeline in, or why, even like why would we do this anyway? Any questions about anything? So picking up.
I have used this method probably more often than I should, but my tip is to, when you're picking up the stitches there, that using a smaller size needle is very helpful to easily get into the stitches.
Yes, I would definitely say using a smaller one. So this that I'm knitting with, these are size 15s, and the one that I'm picking up with is a 10.5. So definitely use a smaller needle for picking up, because they're just holding the stitches. They're not going to be shaping them.
Question on how you would do this in garter stitch fabric.
The garter stitch fabric would actually be easier, I feel, because you have this purl ridge that would keep track of where you are. So, it's going to be easy from going up and down the row. So you would just pick up the first leg of each one, but because you've got this purl ridge to kind of use as a guide, it's going to be I think it's actually easier to keep track of where you are. And then if you, again, like stop and look and see, you can see they're all slanted the same direction and spaced out nicely. So don't you think garter stitch would actually be easier, Claire?
Yeah, it's a lot easier, like you said, because you've got those ridges to use as a guide, and you just have to sort of separate them a little bit so you can see that stitch between.
I would just, every now and then, just the spot where you're working, you can just stretch it out a bit. So if you do this and you do it 100% correct, and you're very careful, it's an absolute beautiful thing. Then you take your knitting needles away. And again, pretend that instead of just this little swatch, that maybe this is an Afghan, or maybe this is a sweater in the round, and maybe I have like 200 or 300 stitches, and you wouldn't want to unknit 300 stitches, like 4 or 5 rows, because it adds up really fast. So I take my needle out, and then this is called frogging, because you rip it, rip it, rip it, and it sounds like a frog saying ribbit, right? Rip it, rip it, rip it, and if I did it correct, then what happens is all of my stitches are now, I ripped out my mistakes. All of these stitches, the stitches are mounted the proper way on my needle because I picked up the front leg first, and I'm ready to start knitting. So now I've got them on this smaller needle, and you're just going to be using your bigger needle. And you can either transfer them back onto your bigger needle, or you can, depending on where it's positioned, I could start knitting right here and just start knitting with my bigger needles. Or if you need to, you can just transfer them one at a time back to your bigger needle and just go from there. Any questions? But because I already, put this lifeline in earlier, that's what I could do, is I could just rip it all the way out back to here and then put these back on a needle and then continue knitting. So, this is for people that plan ahead, and then this other method is for people that don't plan ahead. So any questions about anything we've covered today at all? We have about 5 minutes left. Any questions? Do you guys feel a little bit more empowered about fixing mistakes? And
Someone wants you to go all the way down to that dental floss lifeline.
No, the answer is no. Because I don't want
Can
to
you,
like re-knit it that much. I'm going to use these in the next class, so I don't want to have to rip it out and rework it up again. So, but it would be the exact same thing. It would be just like it's on this here, and then you just have to carefully slip each one back on your needle, being careful not to split them as you go. But yeah, I don't want to unravel it down to there. Sorry about it. Sorry about it.
someone asked if you could do a lifeline in crocheting. Sadly, no.
I was gonna say, I don't think so. Crochet though is different because you don't end up with like a 300 active loops that you have to manage. Like with crochet, it's a whole different situation. Like you really only have one active loop at a time, right? So that's why crochet is it's a whole other animal. Crochet is a whole other thing. And you can't, with crochet, you can't like unravel down and then pick back up. It's a complete different structure of the fabric.
Yeah, sadly, I think if you make a mistake in crochet, there's a lot more ripping out.
But crochet works up so much faster. So it's give or take.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I see a couple questions about when the recording of this class will be available. It'll be available on the Michael's YouTube channel in about 24 to 48 hours after this class is finished. I'm going to go ahead and put the handout in the chat here in case you missed that or need it again.
But we've taught this class before, and there are old versions of this class already out there. So if you need to refer back to something like tonight or tomorrow morning, you can just Google knitting 104 Michaels or not Google it, go into the YouTube search and type in michaels.com knitting 104, and you can bring up old classes. And sometimes I say things a little differently, and it might be something you can watch. And if you do have questions, in the meantime, you can also contact me on Instagram. My Instagram name is, maybe Claire will put it in the chat, it's Mr. Woolly Bear. It's M-I-S-T-E-R, Woolly Bear spelled out. And then you can send me a direct message on Instagram, or on Facebook. You can just send it directly to my name on Facebook. My picture's there, you'll recognize it. It's a clear picture of my face. So yeah, if you have any questions or need any help, feel free to send me a direct message, and I'm always glad to offer further assistance. So, all right, any other questions at all before we go? I think we got 2 minutes.
Oh, I don't know that we've ever ended early.
I've never ended early, Claire. This is unprecedented.
Well, I'll give everyone another reminder that we do have some more classes coming up in March, including our special premium class, the March 28th for the Checkmate sweater. So if you want to learn how to do cute little motifs like Darren's gnome there, go ahead and sign up for that class.
All right, well, thanks for coming to class. Honestly, the best thing to do with the information you've learned today would be to just work up a couple of practice little swatches and start unraveling them, try to pick up knit stitches, try to pick up purl stitches, try to double check and make sure you're not twisting your stitches as you're replacing them back on your needle. Practice is the best way to start to have this feel comfortable in your hand. As you're knitting and purling and making your stitches in the first place, start looking at them. How is the yarn like fitting together to kind of create these stitches and to kind of create the fabric? Get familiar with that, and that will help you in your knitting, starting to understand like how mistakes happen and how you're going to fix them and what the actual structure of the knitted fabric is. So, all right. There are no more questions. Just don't forget to practice. Thanks for coming to class, and we will see you soon.